Hey, this is Jamie from Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to talk about my top 10 favorite games with player-defined victory conditions. And by this specifically, I'm saying this way. I know in the main image for the video I say no win conditions or no victory conditions, but that's a little bit of a misnomer. I just couldn't fit it on that banner as well as I wanted to. The idea here is that I want to talk about games as inspired by two very specific recent Kickstarter games where players themselves decide what's important to them, and those things are determine whether or not the players win or not. So players are essentially saying, okay, this is what's important to me in this game, instead of the game telling them what's important. And players are defining whether or not they won or lost based on those conditions. So I want to start off. So that's my introduction. I'm going to jump into a discussion at first, in general, of Mythwind and Earthborne Rangers, two games that I haven't played, but I'm going to read some content from their Kickstarter pages because they fascinate me with what they're doing, and especially has given me some great food for thought about the open world cooperative game that I've been working on, which I have really focused on not having the game tell players what their victory condition is, while still giving players purpose in the game. So it's something I've been thinking about a lot for the last few years as I've been designing my game. So if you want to skip ahead to the top 10 list, feel free to do so. You can look in the progress bar below to see when the top 10 starts. Or you can come back here and hear my thoughts and the thoughts from Mythwind and Earthborne Rangers designers about victory conditions and having players have that power. So let's jump right into that. So let's first look at Mythwind. So Mythwind has a really interesting part on the page where Brendan, the designer and publisher, describes a few different aspects of Mythwind. I'll just read the whole thing because I think it's really interesting. So the first question he asks and answers is, when does the game end? Because often victory or losing is often defined by when the game actually ends. So Brendan says, Mythwind has no distinct ending. The game is a persistent world experience, and you're encouraged to play at your own pace to discover the content, progress the characters, and build out the town. Yes, you will eventually run out of new things to see and explore, but that in and of itself does not trigger an ending. He goes on to say a little bit more here. So I'll skip over that. You can read it on the project page or on the screen here. So here's where he says, how do I win Mythwind? There's a book series by Brandon Sanderson that I'm a massive fan of that has a motto in it, journey before destination. The short answer to the question above is that you win by embracing the journey. For many players, this will be a potential sticking point. It may even turn you off from wanting to play the game. But I know that players are hungry for a cooperative experience where the emphasis is in the relaxing nature of sitting down and playing through an experience. Now, there are goals and achievements to work towards. And so he'll go on and talk about this more in a second, but I think this ties well to his first point about when the game ends. And I just really love the idea of a game, particularly a cooperative game, but I think it could work for a competitive game as well, where you just sit down and play for a while until you're done playing. There are some other examples that I'll mention in the top 10 of games that do this pretty similarly to Mythwind, maybe not quite as fully embracing this concept, but pretty close. But it definitely interests me, especially, so it's essentially giving players control of how long they play a game. Instead of sitting down and saying, okay, we're going to play this game until the game tells us that it is over, which is probably printed on the box. You probably have a rough idea. Okay, we're going to sit down for 60 minutes to 90 minutes to play this game. Instead, you can sit down and you can either go into a game with a defined playing time that you want. You can say, okay, today we're going to play for 70 minutes. You can do that. Or you can sit down and just play as long as you want. You could play for 20 minutes. You could play for 30. You could play for 4 hours if you want to. You're completely flexible in terms of how long you want to play. So I think that is really interesting, and letting the journey itself be the focus rather than some endpoint that the game is saying this is when you need to stop, or this is when you will win or lose. I think this is really interesting. Brendan goes on. This is a really interesting answer here. The question is my playing of Mythwind aimless? His answer: for players who do want to measure their success and progress, there are several ways that Mythwind approaches this. The first is in the progression of the town and unique characters. There's a natural sense of building more and more that players can work towards. If you love upgrading your character, Mythwind provides avenues so you can spec out each character with unique role skills. So this is player defined. There's more that Brandon will say in a second here, but this is player defined. You're saying, okay, you are saying to yourself, it is important for me to make my character better and stronger in these ways. and then you find ways to do that. And so the satisfaction, your sense of victory in the game comes from being able to do that thing that you decided was important to you. Again, with the town, the same thing with the town. Brennan goes on to say, layered on in all of this is our goal and achievement system. The town, along with each character, has a unique set of achievements that can be accomplished. If you don't care about this, you don't need to even look at the achievement list. For those who do focus on completing the achievements, players will be rewarded with secret content to unlock. So Brennan is essentially saying the core game, it sounds like the core game itself isn't really even built around the achievements. That is something that you can do if you want. But if you need that carrot on a stick, he is providing it for you. But again, you are choosing those things. The game isn't randomizing a set of achievements at the beginning of each game and saying, okay, this is your achievement to accomplish this game. Instead, you are looking at the list and saying, hey, it looks really cool. I want to craft this awesome sword this game because this achievement mentions that. That is a thing that I am deciding right now is important to me, and you're pursuing it, and your sense of victory is coming out of being able to do that whenever you are ready to do that. So again, the game isn't rushing you to do it. Maybe there are times in Mythwind where you are rushing you to do it, but I really like the idea that you are deciding, okay, this is something that I want to do, and I'll do it at my own pace, and I'll feel good when I finally accomplish it. Last, Brendan says, for each in a game month in Mythwind, which is 20 days, players will choose from 2 drawn cards a goal to complete. Actually, so that actually goes against what I just said a little bit. These goals help provide a bit of direction to your gameplay during that month. There is a success and failure result for each goal card. If you complete the goal, you will unlock the next level of goal for the specific goal theme, escalating the difficulty. So this actually, I think, goes a little bit against what I've been saying here, maybe a little bit against the idea of winning or losing, because it's Mythwind providing a random element and saying this is what is important to you, and there is success and failure. So that actually, I think, is more in the category of a game with a win or loss condition, even though it isn't the entire game. It is related to that goal. So that is one way to do it. I guess it's providing it for players who want that experience, and maybe that's we will. I'm a backer, so I'm getting this game. I will play it when it comes out, but that element is probably the least interesting of all this other stuff that I've read to you about Mythwind right here. Let me jump over to Earthborne Rangers, then I'll talk a little bit more and then get to my top 10. So Earthborne Rangers has a section on the project page. This is, again, an open world cooperative exploration game. And in one of the project updates, they talk about how there again isn't really a set way of winning or losing in Earthborne Rangers. And they reference a conversation that they had with Jason. So this is Andrew and another Andrew and Jason Perez of One Stop Co-op Shop. And so Jason expressed in the conversation that he says there's no game. Okay, so Andrew actually says the phrase to him of no winning or losing means that there's no game over screen. So there isn't any point in Earthborne Rangers where the game just says you lose, except at the very end of the campaign. There are different endings to the campaign, but any individual session of Earthborne Rangers, the game is not saying you have lost this session. And Jason shared from his perspective that if you can't win or lose, if there isn't that end point where the game says you lose or you win at this point in the game, then he thought that kind of define the game as a storytelling game where you're just kind of telling a story and not instead of it being an actual game, more of an experience, an activity rather than a game. He says that he views this as having no real consequences nor any real stakes. But Andrew goes on to debunk that, because I think that's a bit of a misnomer there, that of course there are consequences and stakes. Even like if you look at your daily life, when you got up today, there isn't a win-lose condition at the end of the day, but there are great consequences. There are great stakes every day when you get out of bed and you go about your day. There are consequences big and small in the things that you decide to do. And yeah, your life isn't a game, but in some ways it also is a game. So Andrew Fisher says this. He says, while there is no countdown timer or doom clock in Earthborne Rangers, again, there's no point in the game where the game says you have lost right now, and there is no timer. You're playing at your own pace and playing as long as you want. While there is no countdown timer or doom clock in Earthborne Rangers, that doesn't mean there aren't objectively good and bad outcomes. If, for example, you have a mission to divert a flood that is threatening a village, the desired outcome is pretty clear. You want to divert that flood. You're going to want to divert that flood, and if you fail to do that, that's certainly going to feel like you've lost that particular game. Succeed or fail, however, the narrative will continue. I think there's a great point here there, because in so many other cooperative games, if you fail to divert that flood, you either lose the game, you lose that scenario, or if it's a campaign game, you have to repeat it, because very few campaign games fail forward. So the game is actually saying, okay, you have to play this again, which does not correlate very well to real life, in that in real life, if you fail to divert that flood, you would have to move on. You would have to deal with those actual consequences. Again, we come back to that word consequences. There are actual consequences, much higher, much more thematic than play again. So he says, succeed or fail, however, the narrative will continue. Succeeding may grant you a reward, but failing may open a new narrative path and give you the opportunity to help rebuild that village, which may grant you an entirely different reward. I think this is a wonderful example, really wonderful example that Andrew provided here, of how there are stakes and consequences, I would say even higher in this style of game, where players are deciding what's important to them and making choices along the way, where the game presents choices to you, and you are presenting yourself with choices as you explore these worlds. You are deciding what's important to you, and you're deciding how to approach these choices, and the consequences and the stakes are that you are essentially at a split path there. If you divert the flood, you save the village. You get some rewards for that. The people are happy that you saved that village. If you don't save that village, though, you haven't lost the game. The world continues to exist. You still continue to play, but a new narrative path opens up. I think that's just a really, really clever approach to games. I think this is maybe, hopefully, in some ways, the next evolution of these games that have a heavy narrative, heavy story element to them. Because I think it's just so much more thematic to let players decide what's important to them and when the game ends, or when they want to stop playing for that day, and have the choices that they make result in what feels like a victory or not to them. This is all stuff, I mean, I'm talking out loud here because this is stuff that I've been thinking through a lot for my also cooperative open world game. And that I want players to have many different senses of accomplishment. And my open world game is very, very open. It's extremely open. Like it's hard to even really describe how open it is. But one of my current concerns with the game is that it is so open that players don't have any sense of direction, and it might feel a little aimless. And so I want to give them little ways that they can. I want to help them figure out what's important to them, basically, without having the game tell them, this is what you need to do to win. I want to kind of nudge players in little directions and let them choose. And if they don't choose, then that can feel important too, because they're saying, okay, that isn't important to me. I want to go find something else that is important to me. I think that's really cool. And it also ties to the length of the game. I talked about campaign games recently, looking at different approaches of how games do campaign games. And I think both these games, Earthborne Rangers and Mythwind, are essentially campaign games. They play for a long time over repeated sessions where previous sessions matter for future sessions. And in my game, I want to give players flexibility in terms of how long they want to play. I almost want players to define what a session is, and even define what a campaign is in terms of the length, because they might sit down and play and decide, okay, we've had fun with this mission or this whatever has happened in the game so far, but we want to start again. This isn't where we want to be right now. And I want to give players the ability to have closure to that session or that mini campaign, and not just completely desert it. And so these are things that I'm thinking through right now that are tied to how I'm going to let players figure out what's important to them in the game, but also give them little nudges and give them flexibility in terms of the playing time. I'm just almost rambling right now, but it's just all stuff that I'm processing right now, and it's been really helpful to see what Mythwind and Earthborne Rangers are doing with that style of game. Let me jump into my top 10 list, and I'll try to keep it pretty quick here so I don't... I've already probably overstayed my welcome here with 14 minutes of rambling. But let's get to the top 10. So my top 10 games, and this was a tough list to make because there are plenty of games that I play where I am trying to win, but when I know I'm not going to win, I'm looking at other things in the game that are important to me. Like in Tapestry, I might say, okay, I'm probably not going to win this game, but it would be really nice to fill up my capital city in Tapestry, that sort of thing. I have not included that type of game on this list. Rather, I've included games that really where points and victory aren't really defined by the game, or even if they are, players typically don't play that way, or I typically don't play that way. I'm going to start out with two video games, two digital games. The first is Subnautica. I haven't played through all of Subnautica. I know there is actually a way to win the overall entire game of Subnautica, but in any individual session of Subnautica, you are defining what's important to you. Subnautica is a game where you've crashed on an ocean planet, and it starts off at the very beginning feeling like a survival game, but it isn't really a survival game. It's very easy to survive in Subnautica. You just have to figure out how to level up your technology to make it very easy to survive, which you do very early. And then after that, it's just exploring. You're just exploring and leveling up and building new technology, enhancing your tech tree, going deeper and deeper. You are deciding what's important to you. You're deciding, okay, do I want to explore out? Do I want to go over to the spaceship that's crashed over there in the water? Do I want to go deeper and deeper? When I go deeper and deeper, where do I want to go deeper and deeper? You are deciding what's important to you in Subnautica. And I think that's brilliant. I think that's so brilliant how Subnautica does that and makes you figure out what that next thing is that you want to do. Oftentimes you can almost like see it. You swim down and you can like see the next thing that you want to do, but you just can't quite get there yet. So you have to level up just a little bit more and get there. But it doesn't really feel like a grind either, which is amazing that Subnautica pulls that out. So Subnautica is my number 10 game with player-defined motivations and victory conditions. The number 9 game is Stardew Valley. This was actually mentioned on the Mythwind page. Stardew Valley is a game about essentially just building a farm and contributing to a village. You are deciding what you want to do. There is a Stardew Valley tabletop game, but that game, interestingly enough, gave players victory conditions that they needed to meet. I think the video game doesn't do that. Like there are ways to eventually, again, win the game after many, many hours. But on what you do on any given day, the game might give you a little nudge. It might say, okay, today, apple prices are better than normal. And so you might say, okay, today I might go out there and get some apples. But the game doesn't say you lost today because you didn't get apples, or you win today if you do get apples. You are deciding if that's important to you, or you're just saying, okay, today I want to go cut down trees, or today I want to try to figure out how to build a chair. You decide what is important to you in Stardew Valley, and you decide when you want to do it and when you get that sense of completion in Stardew Valley. So that's my number 9 game. Number 8 is the Seventh Continent. And this kind of follows the trend of the other games that I mentioned, in that in the Seventh Continent, there is a goal, there's a curse that you're trying to figure out and solve and accomplish, or at least address, that can take many, many hours in the Seventh Continent. However, in any individual session of the Seventh Continent, really the only goal is to survive. And if you play Seventh Continent a little loose, like I prefer to do, then it is very difficult to die. Like, you're really not going to die. You're just kind of exploring for a while and seeing what's out there in the world. And along the way, you might see something interesting and decide, okay, this is important to me. I want to figure this out. This is what I want to do for the next 20 minutes. I want to figure this out. And or oftentimes it's like, I want to get over to this place. How do I do that? And you're trying to figure that out. But that's coming from you. You're deciding that's important to you, and you're pursuing that goal. I think Seventh Continent really gives you the freedom to do that in its system, and how open it is. It's rarely saying you need to do this thing before you do this other thing. It is very open. And I think that open feel contributes to letting players decide what's important to them, what is a victory to them. So that's number 8. At number 7, I have Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. This is a heavy narrative game where players work together to solve a mystery, and technically they're trying to do it better than Sherlock Holmes. However, I have not found that to be an important part of the game. Like, yeah, it's nice to get to the end of a game and compare yourself to what Sherlock Holmes did, but the real satisfaction of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, in my opinion, is solving the mystery or solving mysteries in your own way. So again, it's very open. You are presented with a crime scene, and then the game just says go, do whatever you want, and you can use like the newspaper from that day. You can use the directory to decide where you want to go. You can use the map to say, okay, the crime happened here. I want to go over here and talk to this person, this person. That is totally up to you how you do that. And whether or not you beat Holmes or not ends up being largely irrelevant. It's about what you figured out along the way. It's about the journey, like they say on the Mythwind project page. So that's Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. At number 6, I have Wavelength. So I do have some party-style games on this list because party-style games rarely have a win condition, or I think they're more fun when you don't play them with a win condition. So in Wavelength, it is a game where you are presenting. You have this card that says something like is very edible or is completely inedible, and then you reveal to yourself privately on this big toy-like device where on the spectrum you need to select a thing that represents that. It's very tough to describe, but like in that example, if it says is very edible, is very inedible, and the spectrum randomly comes up and says you need to pick something that is slightly edible, but just slightly, then you yourself need to think of something that is only slightly edible so that when you turn the Wavelength device around to other players, they will guess on that device where on that spectrum that thing is. It's an awkwardly difficult game to describe, but it's very simple when you play that way. I like playing Wavelength not in teams, but just as a little bit more of an activity where it's my turn. I get to share my thing with everyone, and everyone kind of talks together about where they would put the thing, the Wavelength device. And I've had a really, really good time playing that way. And even though I make it sound like an activity, there is still a sense of accomplishment when you get players to guess the right place on the Wavelength. That feels good. That is the goal. That is the goal of the game. But you're not winning or losing at any given time, and you can play Wavelength for as long as you want based on that style of play. So I think it fits well in this category of player-defined win conditions. And number 5 is Legacy of Dragonholt. This is another wonderful story-driven game where you can really play at your own pace, even though time is a mechanism in the game. There are different missions you can go on, but there's a big town hub where you can just hang out in this town, and there are legitimate things to do in the town. You can go to like the tavern, and if you go to the tavern at different times of the day, you'll see different people there. If you go to the tavern on different days, you will see people there. Or if some things have happened or haven't happened, or if you've done or not done certain things, the tavern will interact. You'll interact differently with the tavern, and that's just one example of many different places you can visit in town. And when you're ready, you can say, okay, let's go off and do this mission, this scenario. And there's a separate storybook for that specific scenario. There is, in Legacy of Dragonholt, there are stakes related to time. So it's not completely open in terms of how long you take to do a certain thing. Like in the Earthborne Rangers example, I don't know exactly how the game plays it. I haven't played it yet. I am a backer, but I haven't played it. But I don't know if that what was the example? The thing that was collapsing, the diverting a flood. I don't know if the flood is happening at a certain time or if it's happening on its own schedule, or if you decide when you want to divert that flood or not. But to bring this back to Legacy of Dragonholt, in that game, things will happen at a certain time. And so, but even then, you don't lose a scenario in Legacy of Dragonholt if the flood ends up happening. There are just consequences to that. The flood happens, and you might feel a sense of failure. You might feel that you failed this town, but at the same time, that flood might mean something else too. It might mean something slightly good for someone. It might mean it opens up a different path for you or a different conversation to have in town. And then you continue playing. You just continue to play in the game. I really like that style of play in Legacy of Dragonholt. I've had a lot of fun with it. So that's at number 5. At number 4, I have The Crew. So this is one of the examples I have here in front of me, The Crew. So The Crew is a weird one to put on this list because on a mission-by-mission basis, there is definitely a fail and win condition. In The Crew, it's a cooperative trick-taking game where the game presents you with tasks that you have to accomplish, and if you complete those tasks, you win that mission. If you don't complete those tasks, you fail that mission. But beyond that, and those missions usually they're very fast. And so beyond that, The Crew is very flexible in defining what a win is over a session of playing The Crew. Because there's so many missions in here, you can start at mission 1 and you can decide, okay, we're going to play until we lose a mission. Well, that'll be what's important to us today. We'll play until we lose a mission. You can say we're going to play until we can beat level 10. And so we'll play through until we beat level 10. You are deciding that, not the game. The game isn't telling you that. You are deciding that's important to you. You can say, we're going to play every 5th mission today. And that we'll just level up in big chunks and see how far we can go. You can say, like I did at Geekway when I played the new underwater version of the crew, which I really enjoyed. We just kind of jumped around. We played the 1st and 2nd one, and then we played the 5th one and the 10th one. I think we ended at mission 29 because that looked interesting. We were just saying, okay, let's challenge ourselves in these different ways and see what happens. I really love that flexibility of the crew. And yeah, that probably does apply to other games too, but because of the number of missions in the crew, it really gives you flexibility to decide, how are we going to play this today? And how are we going to feel good about what we did today in the crew? That's number 4. At number 3, I have a big, chunky, another open world game, and that is Sleeping Gods. There are modes in Sleeping Gods where you can just die and lose. But I think that's pretty, well, probably mileage may vary here, but I found that difficult to do when we played. There was never, we are always feeling like the stakes were high, where there were things that we could lose at, but not that we'd lose the entire campaign or completely die. And even if you lose in a game, or if you die in a game, you can then start over. That you can still kind of refresh that character and continue playing. And I think there's a specific mode in the game that really leans into that format. But Sleeping Gods kind of does what with achievements. The achievements are a little bit of the focus here, but the game even lets you do whatever you want there. So there are achievements to accomplish in the game, but the game doesn't say these are the achievements you must accomplish at any given time or over the course of this campaign. It just lets you check them off. And at the end of the campaign, it might say, okay, if you've accomplished 10 of these, then here's your narrative path. If you've accomplished 20 of these, here's your narrative path. But you were deciding what to go after over the course of the entire campaign, and you're deciding how that really is important to you or how that feels good or not. And within each game of Sleeping Gods, it is really flexible in terms of what feels like a win for that individual session. Oftentimes, Megan and I would sit down and play Sleeping Gods, and we'd have these quests out there. So the game does give you quests, but it doesn't say you win or lose if you accomplish this quest. It's up to you. You decide, okay, this quest sounds cool, or it sounds like it might be nearby. In this session, let's make sure we accomplish that quest. It might take a few days of that within the construct of the game. It may not. We are looking at those quests and deciding what's important to us. And I think that is a really interesting way to do this style of game where there isn't a set win or lose condition. Rather, you give players a bunch of things that they can do, and they decide if those things are important to them or not. And simply by naming them quests, they seem important. Like really, they aren't that big of a deal, but they seem important in the confines of the game because they're called quests. So I think that nomenclature is also pretty important. That's number 3, Sleeping Gods. And that is the number 1 kind of like heavy game on this list. But I needed to end with 2 games that I really love that I think also, and they are party games, but I think they embrace this format really well. Number 2 is Telestrations. Telestrations is a kind of a now classic party game where you are drawing something on a pad, or the way we often like to play, you write something kind of silly on a pad, on these dry erase pads. You pass that to the next player. They need to draw it within a minute, and then the next player looks at what they drew and tries to guess what it was, and they write it down. And you do this in secret as you pass these books around the table or outside. You could play outside or on the patio. And then everyone kind of presents the story of what unfolded in their book of Telestrations. There's no winning or losing when you play that way. I think there's probably like some point system in this game, but I don't know if anyone actually plays Telestrations that way. It's the winning and losing in this game is much more about whether or not you laughed a lot, or you decide, okay, I want to try to make a really beautiful drawing. That might be winning or losing to you in this game. I want to make a beautiful drawing. Again, you're deciding what is important to you, what feels like a victory in Telestrations when you play this game. And I've had a blast with it as a result. Number 1 is kind of similar to that. It is a party game. It is just one. It is a cooperative party game where, again, the game does give you a way to win or lose. It gives you a construct of you put this many cards on the table based on this many players. You need to earn this many to have a victory or not. But again, I don't know many people who actually play that way with just one. Rather, when we play, we sit down and we play for a while. And winning or losing comes down to whether or not we had fun while playing, and whether or not you were able to get players to help players guess the right clue, or if you were able to guess the right clue when it was your turn. In Just One, the idea is that you have a card where you don't know what's on that card. You don't know what it's saying. All other players know the word, and they are trying to write down a one-word clue that helps you guess what that word is. However, if any of those players reveal a clue that is identical to a clue that another player has given, the guessing player doesn't get to see those clues. So it's really interesting from both sides of the table. When you were trying to guess, you have these one-word clues. You're trying to guess what your word is. When you're not trying to guess, you're trying to give a clue that you think is really going to be helpful to the guesser, but won't overlap with something that someone else is trying to give to that guesser. It's a wonderful game, and again, we don't play Just One to win or lose, even though we do play to do well. Like when we play Just One, we want to do well. We want to have a big stack of cards that said we guessed correctly here. I want when I'm the guesser, I want to do well. I want to guess the word. When I'm not the guesser, I want to convey a really good clue. I want to feel clever about the clue that I gave. And so again, it fits in this category of the players defining what is a win or a loss to them. They're defining what's important to them in Just One. Obviously, there's a mix of games here. There's a lot of kind of cooperative open games on this list, and there's also party games and a few video games. So there are a lot of different ways that you can approach this topic of player-defined victory conditions or lose conditions, or how long they're deciding to play. I'm sure I've missed some great examples here, especially in the digital game world where I don't know a whole lot about that world. But I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, both about games that I mentioned, games that I'm missing, and this whole concept of playing a game based on you deciding what's important to you. What is a victory to you in that game, like Mythwind and Earthborne Rangers? Thanks. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.